Speaking of illegal immigration, what do you think about the border czar, Tom Homan?
Tom Homan is a very legit dude. Got to know him a little bit in Trump 1.0. He is an original, true believer on enforcing immigration law as it is. Now, notice how I just said it that. That's a politically correct way of saying mass deportation. And I will point out for my left-wing critics in that, yeah, he really believes in the ability, in the necessity of mass deportation, and he has the background to be able to carry that out. I will give some warnings, and this will apply to Doge too. Czar has no statutory or constitutional authority. Czar has as much authority as the president of the United States gives him. Donald Trump, I think it's fair to say, even his critics, or even the people who love him, could say he can be capricious at times. And he can strip you or not strip you or give you the ability to compel. So czar in and of itself is frankly a very flawed position in the White House. And it's one that I really wish we would move away from. I understand why we do it. It's basically to do a national security advisor, interagency convener to accomplish certain goals. That said, there is a person, Stephen Miller, who will be in the White House, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, who has well-founded beliefs, experience in government, and rock-solid ideology on this, which I think would also give him the ability to work with Homan to pull that off. That said, a corollary to this, and frankly, this is the one I am the most mystified yet, is Kristi Noem as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. So let me just lay this out for people, because people don't know what this is. The Department of Homeland Security, 90% of the time, the way you're going to interact with them is TSA. You don't think about it. But people don't know the Department of Homeland Security is one of the largest law enforcement, if maybe the largest law enforcement agency in the world. It's gigantic. You have extraordinary statutory power to be able to prove investigations. You have Border Patrol, ICE, TSA, CBP, all these other agencies that report up to you. But most importantly for this, you will be the public face of mass deportation. So I was there in the White House briefing room last time around when Kirstjen Nielsen, who was the DHS secretary under Donald Trump, and specifically the one who enforced child separation for a limited period of time, she was a smart woman. She has long experience in government, and honestly, she melted under the criticism. Kristi Noem is the governor of South Dakota. I mean, that's great. You have a little bit of executive experience, but to be honest, I mean, you have no law enforcement background. You have no ability to, you have no, frankly, with understanding of what it is going to be like to be the secretary of one of the most controversial programs in modern American history. You have to go on television and defend that every single day, a literal job requirement under Donald Trump. And you will have to have extraordinary command of the facts. You have to have a very high intellect. You have to have the ability to really break through. And I mean, we all watched how she handled that situation with her dog and her interviews, and that does not give me confidence that she will be able to do all that well in the position.
So what do you think is behind that? So Crystal Ball's theory on Breaking Point is that there's some kind of interpersonal, I didn't know. I should know this, but I didn't know any of the. Yeah. There was some cheating or whatever.
There's a rumor, nobody knows if it's true, that Corey Lewandowski and Kristi Noem had a previous relationship ongoing. Corey Lewandowski is a Trump official, and that he maybe put her in front. I don't know.
Is this like the Real Housewives of DC?
Yeah, kind of. Although, I mean, it was the most open secret in the world. Allegedly. I don't know if it's true. Okay. All right. I mean, I don't like to traffic too much in personal theories, but I mean, in this respect, it might actually be correct in terms of how it all came down. I have no idea what he's thinking. I truly don't. I mean, maybe it's like he was last time. He said, I want a woman who's like softer and like emotionally and the ability to be the face of my immigration program. I mean, again, like I said, I don't see it in terms of her experience and her media. It's frankly like not very good.
So you think she needs to be able to articulate, not just be like the softer face of this radical policy, but also be able to articulate what's happening with the reasoning behind all
Yes, you need to give justification for everything. Here's the thing. Under mass deportation, the media will drag up every sob story known to planet Earth about this person and that person who came here illegally and why they deserve to stay. And really what the quasi thing is, that's why the program itself is bad and we should legalize everybody who's here illegally. Okay, so the thing is that you need to be able to have extraordinary oversight. You need a great team with you. You need to make sure that everything everything is being done by the book. The way that the media is being handled is that you throw every question back in their face and you say, well, you either talk about crime or you talk about the enforceability of the law, the necessity. I mean, I think articulated a very coherent case for why we need much less high levels of immigration to the United States. And I am the son of people who immigrated to this country. But one of the favorite phrases I heard from a guy named Mark Krikorian, who's a Center for Immigration Studies, is we don't make immigration policy for the benefit of our grandparents. We make immigration policy for the benefit of our grandchildren. And that is an extraordinary and good way to put it. And in fact, I would say it's a triumph of the American system that somebody whose family benefited from the immigration regime and was able to come here. My parents had PhDs, came here legally, applied, spent thousands of dollars through the process, can arrive at the conclusion that actually we need to care about all of our fellow American citizens. I'm not talking about other Indians or, other whatever. I'm talking about all of us. I care about everybody who is here in this country. But fundamentally, that will mean that we are going to have to exclude some people from the U.S. And another thing that the open borders people don't ever really grapple with is that even within their own framework, it makes no sense. So, for example, a common left-wing talking point is that it's America's fault that El Salvador and Honduras and Central America is fucked up. And so because of that, we have a responsibility to take all those people in because it's our fault. Or Haiti, right? But if you think about it, America is responsible, and I'm just being honest, for destroying and ruining a lot of countries. They just don't benefit from the geographic ability to walk to the United States. So, I mean, if we're doing grievance politics, Iraqis have way more of a claim to be able to come here than anybody from El Salvador who's talking about something that happened in 1982. So within its own logic, it doesn't make any sense. Even under the asylum process, people don't even know this. You're literally able to claim asylum from domestic violence. Okay. Imagine that. That is a local law enforcement and problem of people who are experiencing that in their home country. I know how cold-hearted this sounds, but maybe, honestly, it could be because I'm Indian. One of the things that whenever you visit India and you see a country with over 1 billion people, you're like, holy shit, this is crazy. And you understand both the sheer numbers of the amount of people involved and also there is nothing in the world you could ever do to solve all problems for everybody. It's a very complex and dynamic problem. And it's really nice to be bleeding heart and to say, oh, well, we have responsibility to this and to all mankind and all that. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work with a nation state. It doesn't work with a sovereign nation. We're the luckiest people in the history of the world to live here in this country. And you need to protect it. And protecting it requires really thinking about the fundamentals of immigration itself and not telling us stories. There's a famous moment from the Trump White House where Jim Acosta, CNN White House correspondent, got into it with Stephen Miller, the current, who will be the current deputy chief. And he was like, what do you say, something along the lines, to people who say you're violating, that quote on the Statue of Liberty, like, give me you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, all of that, the Emma Lazarus quote. And Stephen very logically was like, what level of immigration comports with the Emma Lazarus quote? Is it 200,000 people a year? Is it 300? Is it 1 million? Is it 1.5 million? And that's such a great way of putting it because there is no limiting principle on Emma Lazarus quote. There is when you start talking, honestly, you're like, okay, we live in X, Y, and Z society with X, Y, and Z GDP. People who are coming here should be able to benefit for themselves and us, not rely on welfare, not, be people who we have to take care of after because we have our own problems here right now. And who are the population, the types of people that we can study and look at who will be able to benefit. And based on that, yeah, immigration is great. But there are a lot of economic, legal, and societal reasons for why you definitely don't want the current level. But another thing is, even if we turn the switch and we still let in 1.5 million people a year under the chain family-based migration, I think it would be a colossal mistake because it's not rooted in the idea that people who are coming to America are explicitly doing so at the benefit of America. It's doing so based on the familial connections of people who already gamed the immigration system to be able to come here. I have a lot of family in India, and I love them, and some of them are actually very talented and qualified. If they wanted to come here, I think they should be able to apply on their own merit, and that should have nothing to do with their familial status of the fact that I'm a U.S. citizen.
Like you mentioned the book Melting Pot or Civil War by Raihan Salam. he makes an argument against open borders. The thesis there is assimilation should be a big part. I guess there's some kind of optimal rate of immigration which allows for assimilation.
Yeah, and there are ebbs and flows. And that's kind of what I was talking about historically, where, the truth is you could walk the streets of New York City in the early 1900s and late 1890s, and you're not going to hear any English. And I think that's bad. Really what you had was ethnic enclaves of people who were basically practicing their way of life just like they did previously, bringing over a lot of their ethnic problems that they had and even some of their cultural, like, unique capabilities or whatever, bringing it to America. And then New York City police and others are figuring out, like, what the hell do we do with all this? And it literally took shutting down immigration for an entire generation to do away with that. And there's actually still some. The point about assimilation is twofold. One is that you should have the capacity to inherit the understanding of the American character that has nothing to do with race. And that's so unique that I can sit here as a child of people from India and have such a deep appreciation for the Scots-Irish. I consider myself, American first. And one of the things that I really love about that is that I have no historical relationship to anybody who fought in the Civil War. But I feel such kinship with a lot of the people who did, and reading the memoirs and the ideas of those that did, because that same mindset of the victors and the values that they were able to instill in the country for 150 years later gives me the ability to connect to them. And that's such an incredible victory on their part. And that's such a unique thing. In almost every other country in the world, in China, in India, or wherever, you're kind of like what you are. You're a Hindu, you're a Jew, you're Han Chinese, you're a Uyghur, or you're Tibetan, something like that. You're born into it. But really, here was one of the only places in the world where you can really connect to that story and that spirit and the compounding effect of all of these different people who have come to America. And that is a celebration of immigration as an idea. But immigration is also a discrete policy. And that policy was really screwed up by the Biden administration. And so we can celebrate the idea and also pursue a policy for all of the people in the U.S., our citizens, to actually be able to benefit. And look, it's going to be messy. And honestly, I still don't know yet if Trump will be able to pursue actual mass deportation, just because I think that I'm not sure the public is ready for it. I do support mass deportation. I don't know if the public is ready for it. I don't know. I'll have to see, because there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. There's mandatory e-verify, which requires businesses to basically verify you're a U.S. citizen or you're here legally whenever they employ you, which is not the law of the land currently, which is crazy, by the way. There's, you can cut off or tax remittance payments, which are payments that are sent back to other countries like Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala. Again, illustrating my economic migrant point. There are a lot of various different ways where you can just make it more difficult to be illegally here in the U.S. so people will self-deport. But if he does pursue like real mass deportation, that will be a flashpoint in America.
Aren't you talking about things like what Tom Homan said, worksite raids, sort of increasing the rate of that?
Yeah, we used to do that,
But there's a rate at which you can do that where it would lead to, radical social upheaval.
Yeah, it will. And I think some people need to be honest here. And this actually flies in the face of, one of the most common liberal critiques is this is going to raise prices. And yeah, I think it's true. I think it's worth it. But that's easy for me to say. I'm making a good living. If you care about inflation, you voted for Donald Trump, and your price of groceries or whatever goes up because of this immigration policy, I think that needs to be extremely well articulated by the president. And of course, he needs to think about it. The truth is America right now is built on cheap labor. It's not fair to the consumer. It's not fair to the immigrants, the illegal immigrants themselves, and it's not fair to the natural-born citizen. The natural-born citizen has his wages suppressed for competition by tens of millions of people who are willing to work at lower wages. They have to compete for housing, for social services. Just even, like basic stuff at a societal level. It's not fair to them. It's definitely not fair to the other person because, whenever people say, like, who's going to build your houses or whatever, you're endorsing this quasi-legal system where, uninsured laborers from Mexico They have no guarantee of wages. They're getting paid cash under the table. They are living, 10 to a room. They're sending Mexican remittance payments back just so that their children can eat. I mean, that's not really fair to that person either. So that's the point. The point is that it will lead to a lot of social upheaval. But this gets to my Kirsty Noem point as well, is you need to be able to articulate a lot of what I just said here, because if you don't, it's going to go south real quick.
The way Vivek articulates this is that our immigration system is deeply dishonest. Like, we don't acknowledge some of the things he just said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he wants to make it honest. So if we don't do mass deportation, at least you have to be really honest about the living conditions of illegal immigrants, about basically mistreatment of them.
Yes, it's true. I mean, if you support mass illegal migration, you're basically supporting tens of millions who are living lives as second-class citizens. That's not fair to them. I also think it's deeply paternalistic. So there's this idea that America has so ruined these Central American countries that they have no agency whatsoever, and they can never turn things around. What does that say about our confidence in them? One of the things they always say, they're law-abiding, they're great people and all that. I agree, okay? By and large, I'm not saying these are bad people, but I am saying, like, if they're not bad and they're law-abiding and they're citizens and thoughtful and all that, they can fix their own countries. And they did in El Salvador. That's the perfect example. Look at the dramatic drop in their crime rate. Bukele is one of the most popular leaders in all of South America. That is proof positive that you can change things around despite perhaps a legacy of U.S. intervention. So, to just say this idea that, because it's America's fault that they're screwed up, it takes agency away from them. Another really key part of this dishonesty, this really gets to Springfield and the whole Haitian thing, because everybody, beyond the eating cats and dogs, everybody does not even acknowledge, because when they're like, the Haitians are here legally, they need to actually think about the program. The program is called TPS, so let me explain that. TPS is called Temporary Protected Status. Note, what's the first word in that? Temporary. What does that mean? TPS was developed under a regime in which, let's say that there was a catastrophic, I think this is a real example. I think there was like a volcano or an earthquake or something, where people were granted TPS to come to the United States. And the idea was they were going to go back after it was safe. They just never went back. There are children born in the United States today who are literally who are adults, who are the descendants of people who are still living in the U.S. under TPS. That's a perfect example of what Vivek says is dishonest. You can't mass de facto legalize people by saying that they're here temporarily because of a program or because of something that happened in their home country, when the reality is that for all intents and purposes, we are acknowledging them as full legal migrants. So, even the term migrant to these Haitians in Springfield makes no sense, because they're supposed to be here under TPS. That's not migrant implies permanency. So the language is all dishonest, and people don't want to tell you about the things I just said about chain migration. The vast majority of Americans don't even know how the immigration system works. They don't understand what I just said about TPS. They don't really understand the insanity of asylum law, where you can just literally throw up your hands and say, I fear for my life, and you get to live here for 4 or 5 years before your court date even happens. And, by that time, get a work permit or whatever. You can, get housing, like you just said, in substandard conditions, and you can kind of just play the game and wait before a deportation order comes. And even if it does, you never have to leave, because there's no ICE agent or whatever who's going to enforce it. So the whole system is nuts right now, and we need complete systematic reform that burns it all to the ground.
That said, sort of the image and the reality of a child being separated from their parents seems deeply un-American, right?
Well, I mean, look, it gets okay. So, I'm not going to defend it, but I'll just put it this way.
Do you hate children?
Yeah, see, this is what I mean. Do you think twice whenever you see a drug addict who's put in prison and their child is put in protective services? Nobody in America thinks twice about that, right? Right. So, I mean, well, that's kind of screwed up. Well, we should think about, why did we come to that conclusion? The conclusion is that these adults willingly broke the law and pursued a path of life, which put them on a trajectory where the state had to come in and determine that you are not allowed to be a parent, basically, to this child while you serve your debt to society. Now, child separation was very different. Child separation was also a product of extremely strange circumstances in U.S. immigration law, where basically at the time, the reason why it was happening was because there was no way to prosecute people for illegal entry without child separation. Because previous doctrine, I believe it's called the Flores Doctrine, under it's some asylum law. People have to go check my work on this. But basically, the whole reason this evolved as a legal regime was because people figured out that if you bring a kid with you, because of the so-called Flores Doctrine or whatever, that you couldn't be prosecuted for illegal entry. So it was a de facto way of breaking the law. And in fact, a lot of people were bringing children here who weren't even theirs, they weren't even related to or couldn't even, prove it, were bringing them to get around the prosecution for illegal entry. So I'm not defending child separation. I think it was horrible or whatever. But, if I give you the context, it does seem like a very tricky problem in terms of, do we enforce the law or not? How are we able to do that? And the solution, honestly, is what Donald Trump did was remain in Mexico and then pursue a complete rewrite of the way that we have U.S. asylum law applied and of asylum adjudication and really just about enforcing our actual laws. So when I try to explain to people is the immigration system right now is a patchwork of this deeply dishonest, such a great word, deeply dishonest system in which you use the system and set it up in such ways that illegal immigration is actually one of the easiest things to do to accomplish immigration to the United States. That is wrong. My parents had to apply. It wasn't easy. Do you know in India there's a temple called the Visa Temple where you walk 108 times around it, which is like a lucky number. And if you do it when you're applying for a visa to the United States, all right, it costs a lot of money and it's hard. People get rejected all the time. There's billions of people across the world who would love to be able to come here. And many of them want to do so legally and they should have to go through a process. The current way it works is it's easier to get here illegally than it is legally. I think that's fundamentally right. It's also unfair to people like us whose parents did come here legally.
Can you steel me on the case against mass deportation? What are the strongest arguments?
The strongest argument would be that these people contribute to society, that these people, many of whom, millions of here, have been here for many years, have children, natural-born citizens because of birthright citizenship. It would require something that's fundamentally inhumane and un-American, as you said, the idea of separating families, across different borders simply because of what is quote-unquote like small decision of coming here illegally. And the best case beyond any of this moral stuff for no mass deportation is it's good for business. Illegal immigration is great for big business. It is great for big agriculture. So if you want the lowest prices of all time, then yeah, mass deportation is a terrible idea.
But first of all, very convincing. and second of all, I mean, you can't just do mass deportation without also fixing the immigration system, right?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, there's several pieces of legislation. HR 2, that's something that the Republicans have really coalesced around. It's a border bill. I encourage people to go read it and see some of the different fixes to the U.S. immigration system. I'm curious whether it'll actually pass or not. Remember, there's a very slim majority of the House of Representatives for Republicans this time around, and people vote for a lot of things when they're not in power, but when it's actually about to become the law, we'll see. There's a lot of swing state people out there who may think twice before casting that vote. So I'm definitely curious to see how that one plays out. The other thing is that, like I just said, the biggest beneficiary of illegal immigration is big business. So if you think they're going to take this one lying down, absolutely not. They will fight for everything that they have to keep their pool of cheap labor because it's great for them. I think JD said a story, I think he was on Rogan, about how he talked to a hotelier chain guy and he was like, yeah, it's just terrible. It's like they would take away our whole workforce. And he was like, do you hear yourself? In terms of what you're bragging about, but that's real. That's a real thing. And that, Tyson's Foods and all these other people, that's another really sad part is what I mean by second-class citizenship is this presumption, first of all, that Americans think it's too disgusting to process meat or to work in a field. I think anybody will do anything for the right wage, first of all. But second is, the conditions in a lot of those facilities are horrible and they're covered up for a reason, not only in terms of the way that businesses, that they actually conduct themselves, but also to cover up their illegal immigrant workforce. So honestly, I think it can make things better for everything.
You have studied how government works. What are the chances mass deportation happens?
Well, it depends how you define it. So, I mean, mass deportation could mean 1 million. I mean, nobody even knows how many people are here illegally. It could be 20 million. It could be 30 million. I've seen estimates of up to 30 million, which is crazy. That's almost 1/11 of the entire U.S. population.
What number do you think will feel like mass deportation? 1 million people?
1 million people is a lot. I mean,
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot. I mean, but the crazy part is that's only 1/12 of what Joe Biden let into the country. So it's one of those that just to give people the scale of what it will all look like. Do I think mass deportation will happen? It depends on the definition. Will 1 million over 4 years? Yeah, I feel relatively confident in that. Anything over that, it's going to be tough to say. Like I said, probably the most efficient way to do it is to have mandatory e-verify and to have processes in place where it becomes very difficult to live in the United States illegally. And then you will have mass self-deportation, and they will take the victory lap on that. But actual, like, rounding millions of people up and putting them in deportation facilities and then arranging flights to God knows all across the globe, that's a logistical nightmare. It also costs a lot of money. And don't forget, Congress has to pay for all of this. So, we can have Doge or we can have, mass deportation. So those two things are kind of irreconcilable, actually. There's a lot of competing influences at play that people are not being real about at all.
Yeah, that was one of the tensions I had talking to Vivek, is he's big on mass deportation and big on making government more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And it really feels like there's a tension between those two in the short term.
Well, yes, absolutely.